It was barely past sunrise when a white Lexus came screaming up my gravel driveway like it owned the place. I was out by the barn, tightening fence wire around the south paddock, when the crunch of pink blazer, oversized sunglasses, precision-cut bob, and a clipboard gripped like a weapon. "I'm Beatrice Summers, president of the Hillstone Bluff HOA," she declared, marching toward me like she. Generations, 200 acres of private land sitting well outside the gated limits of Hillstone Bluff. "You're lost," I told her. "This place isn't part of your HOA." She smirked like I was a clueless kid. "That's where you're wrong. We voted last week to expand. Your property is now under our jurisdiction." I raised a brow. "You can't just annex private land." She clicked her tongue. "Smug. We mailed notices. It's official. Frankly, this place is an eyesore." That's when I decided not to tell her who I was just yet. "My name's Everett Ellison, governor of this state." "Clipboard with you." She gasped like I'd slapped her. "Excuse me? I'm trying to save you from fines. You're already in violation for unapproved construction." She whipped out her phone, snapping pictures of my barn, my truck, even my dog napping under the oak tree. "You're trespassing," I warned. 10 minutes to leave before I call the sheriff." She narrowed her eyes, muttered, "Plain and simple." I called the county registrar's office, got Dana on the line, a sharp clerk I'd met years back. She told me the HOA never submitted a license survey, just a doodle signed by their treasurer. No seal, no certification. That was all I needed. Within hours, the state attorney general's office had the documents in hand. I also made another call to an old friend, Deputy Langston. Told him I'd be needing backup at the ranch. The next morning, Langston rolled up at 8 sharp. Straight-laced type, exactly who I needed. And sure enough, at 8:17, 3 cars came crawling in, white. Golden envelope at me. "Final warning before enforcement action," she said. Langston stepped in, cool as ice. "Ma'am, this is private property. Here's the certified county map. Your claim is invalid." She sputtered, tried her sweet voice act, but Langston cut her off. "Attorney General already opened a fraud investigation this morning. Any further attempts will be criminal trespassing." The 2 men behind her looked like they'd swallowed lemons. Beatrice's jaw clenched, but she had no move left. She spun on her heel and stormed back to her Lexus. But she didn't stop there. Here's the twist. Turns out Beatrice wasn't just bossy with a clipboard. My deputy friend traced a black SUV driver to a private contractor, ex-foreclosure muscle hired under a shell company. Funded by the HOA. Organized misconduct. Possibly racketeering. And then came Curtis, a former HOA treasurer who slid into my booth at a roadside diner one night, hands shaking as he pushed over recordings and emails. He'd quit after realizing Beatrice was planning to redraw HOA lines illegally. He had proof they were fining residents retroactively, shredding complaints, even plotting to seize lots near mine under the guise of community consistency. His evidence was dynamite. 2 days later, at the council meeting, the room was packed with residents, reporters, cameras, burying complaints, scheming fines out of thin air. The council didn't need more convincing. They suspended Hillstone Bluff's authority on the spot, pending investigation. Outside, residents clapped, cried, hugged each other. For the first time in years, they weren't under the board's thumb. And the hammer came down fast. The state opened a criminal review, found off-the-books cash payments, fake nonprofits, grant fraud, all tied back to Beatrice and her cronies. Within weeks, arrests were made. Charges of racketeering, wire fraud, tax evasion, you name it. Beatrice's mugshot hit the morning news, that same disapproving mouth now pressed into a thin white line. Residents voted to dissolve the HOA, replacing it with a voluntary association, no fines, no clipboard tyrants. Just potlucks and a newsletter. Curtis was voted chair. I'll never forget that final meeting at the community center. One woman asked if she'd ever see her money back. I told her restitution was already in motion, that fraudulent liens were being voided. Another asked about the threats. I said the state police had everything, and charges would follow. The room erupted in claps, not wild applause, just steady, grateful, real. Afterward, a man pulled me aside, eyes misty, said, "You gave us back our homes." Back at the ranch, the barn roof gleamed in the sun, the paddock fence stood solid, and the air felt lighter, like the land itself had taken a deep breath. A week later, I found a plain letter in my mailbox. No signature, just 6 words. You stopped them. Thank you, all of us. I folded it carefully, slid it into a drawer by my desk. Not for headlines, not for politics, just as a reminder. Because power corrupts, sure, but sometimes it runs headfirst into someone who won't. The funny thing about winning a fight like that is you think it's over. You think the monster's been slain, the village is safe, and you can finally breathe again. But if I've learned anything was hauled off in handcuffs. For a couple weeks, peace actually returned. The ranch was quiet again. I could ride the fence line without seeing strange cars parked on the road. The mailbox wasn't. Stuffed with threats, and neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now stopped by with pies, casseroles, or just a handshake and a thank you. I won't lie, it felt good. But peace has a way of making you soft, and I should have known better than to think it would last. It was a cold Saturday morning when the first sign came. I was sipping coffee on the porch, the kind of slow morning where the sky is so clear you can see hawks gliding miles out. Then a FedEx truck pulled up. Driver handed me a thick envelope, heavier than it should have been. I opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a glossy binder, brand new, labeled Hillstone Bluff Civic Alliance. The name had changed, but the faces inside hadn't. A new, temporary leadership committee, conveniently chaired by Beatrice's vice president, a guy named Malcolm Price. The letter inside was pure arrogance. We invite you to voluntarily integrate your property into the Hillstone Bluff Civic Alliance to ensure consistency and mutual benefit. I nearly spit out my coffee. After everything, fraud, arrests, dissolution, they were already trying to rebuild under a new banner. I called Langston, told him about it. He laughed at first, then went quiet. Governor, you realize this isn't just stubbornness, right? This is money. Someone's bankrolling these people. That stuck with me. Because as much as Beatrice loved her clipboard power trips, the whole fraudulent nonprofit scheme told me there was bigger money behind the curtain. So I started digging again, this time with help from Curtis. He'd become something of a reluctant hero in the neighborhood, but he still had friends who whispered about the Alliance's late-night meetings. One night, he called me, voice tense. You need to see this. We met at the same roadside diner, back booth, him sliding over another envelope. Inside were flyers, fancy ones, printed on glossy paper, promising residents tax breaks, beautification grants, and shared utilities if they supported the Civic Alliance. And at the bottom, a logo I recognized. A development firm out of Dallas I'd butted heads with years back, notorious for gobbling up land under shady pretenses. Suddenly it made sense. This wasn't about homeowners' pride. It was about investors circling like vultures, waiting to turn Hillstone Bluff into a high-end resort. That's when the fight shifted from local nuisance to something bigger. I called in a favor with a journalist I trusted, someone who'd covered corruption cases before. Told her to keep it quiet for now, but start tracing the money. Within a week, she'd found 2 shell LLCs funneling cash into the Civic Alliance, both tied to the same Dallas developers. CAF had slipped the fence. Instead, I found 2 men in reflective vests, spray painting bright orange X's on my fence posts. When I shouted, they bolted, jumped into a black pickup with no plates, and tore off down the county road. I called Langston. He sent a unit, but they were long gone. Still, I kept those fence posts, bright orange scars, as proof. And the very next morning, my neighbors started calling. Same orange X's had shown up on their mailboxes, their driveways, even a tool shed. It was intimidation, pure and simple, dressed up to look like survey work. The Civic Alliance had gone from paperwork to scare tactics overnight. So, Act 2 of this mess was underway, and I wasn't about to play defense this time. I organized another meeting at the Grange Hall, bigger than before. This time we had nearly 60 people, some standing against the walls. I laid it out clear. This isn't about community standards anymore. This is about outside developers using fear to break us down and buy us out cheap. You want to keep your homes, your land. You fight with me now, not later. The room erupted. People were done being polite. We formed committees, one for legal, one for media, one for neighborhood watch. Folks who'd never spoken up before volunteered. That night, for the first time, I felt like we had an army. But the twist? It came from someone I didn't expect. A woman named Evelyn, quiet, older, lived at the edge of the development, stood up, and said she had something to share. She opened her purse, pulled out a recorder, and hit play. A man's voice filled the hall. Malcolm Price, caught on tape, telling another board member that the ranch is the prize, the rest are just dominoes. Turns out Evelyn's grandson had been working part-time as a janitor at the Alliance's temporary office and had slipped the recorder into a desk drawer. That tape changed everything. Because now it wasn't just intimidation, it was conspiracy. I handed copies to the state attorney general the very next morning. By then, the Bureau of Investigation already had their eyes on Beatrice had. The showdown came faster than I expected. One evening, a convoy of SUVs rolled into town, heading straight for the community center where we were holding another coalition meeting. Out stepped Malcolm Price, flanked by men in tailored suits, all smiles and handshakes, like they were there to make peace. "We just want dialogue," Malcolm said, voice oily smooth. But his eyes, cold, calculating, told the real story. I let him talk, let him pitch his vision of prosperity. Then I pulled out the recorder, hit play, and let his own words echo through the hall. I thought about what Evelyn's grandson had risked, what Curtis had risked, what every neighbor had risked just by standing up. It wasn't about my ranch anymore. It was about drawing a line in the Civic Alliance hasn't gone quietly. Their lawyers are filing motions, their money's greasing palms, and there are whispers about state officials who might be compromised. Yeah, the monsters. Your land was their next prize? Would you fight? Would you cave? Or would you risk everything just to keep the ground your kids play on? Because that's the crossroads we're standing at right now. And whichever way it breaks, you can bet it's going to get messy before it gets better.